Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I am the host and the editor, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me is Ultiworld's senior editor, Keith Raynor, for the first show here in 2022. And you know what, Keith? 2021 ended up being at least an okay year for Ultimate Frisbee. I don't know if I would call it a great year, but it was an okay year. I hope 2022 can be a great year.
Me too. Let's have a year we can hang in the rafters. You know what I mean? Last year was not that. Although in a lot of ways, 2021 surpassed some expectations, fell short in other areas. It was just kind of an up and down year.
Yes, certainly better than 2020.
It's a low bar.
It was a very low bar. But how were your holidays, Keith?
Enjoyable. You know, it's nice to take a step back. Not the traditional holiday, not, able to do the whole family thing that we might usually, not really able to go out for New Year's. Although my wife and I generally have a policy where we alternate years of going out and like doing stuff and staying in and being relaxed. Because I actually don't love gigantic, crazy festivities that can kind of come with New Year's. So unfortunately for the second straight year though, we've had to do stay in. So we stayed in and cooked. We made a homemade fettuccine Alfredo. We didn't make the pasta. That's a one-day thing. You got to get equipment for that, but we did make everything else. Not that that's much. It's a very simple recipe. Wait, Charlie, let me ask you something. I was thinking about this today. Do you know anybody, including yourself, who throws pasta against the wall to see if it's done? Or is that just me? Am I crazy?
I've never even heard of that, Keith.
You've never heard of this?
No.
Okay. I don't know where I learned this trick, but somebody said, if you want to see if your pasta's done, you can take it out and throw it against the wall. And if it sticks, then it's done.
And if it bounces back, it's not.
If it bounces back, it needs more time.
But okay.
I mean, obviously, if you're like cooking, you can obviously take a bite out of the pasta.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Where you want
it,
and I do that too sometimes. But sometimes I don't care, and I'm just like, all right, I'm just gonna throw it against the cabinet.
It just seems so much easier to just eat the bite and see if you like the texture.
It's not, because you have to wait for the piece to cool down. You could just like pull it out.
Now, let me ask you this: if you do this and it's it sticks, is it guaranteed to be cooked enough at that point? Would you say?
I believe that's my understanding.
Is it overcooked?
Maybe it is, but at that point, what are you gonna do? You can't take it back.
Well, that's why I'm saying there's got to be a better way than this method.
I don't know, man. Just somebody told me if anybody out there, back me up. Is there anybody else who throws the pasta on the wall?
All right. Well, hit us up, deeplook@ultiworld.com, at deeplookpod on Twitter. This is the question that has been burning on Keith's mind for our first show of 2022.
You could say it's really stuck inside my head,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to overcook this idea, but
oh my God, we're gonna have to cancel the show right now. Here's what we're doing today. We're talking about a little bit more college championships chatter. We're also going to do a 2021 year in review and look back on the year that was. It was a strange year because all of the Frisbee happened between June 1st and Christmas. And we had, a college championships, a club championships, PUL and WUL championship events, AUDL season. Like, we really got a lot in essentially half the year. So it was very busy, and we're going to go back through the headlines and look back at the year in review. Don't miss our subscriber bonus, where we look back at our bold predictions for 2021 and review them and our best and worst takes of the year.
10 for 10, maybe? Maybe we went 10 for 10 on bold predictions? Who knows? You'll have to find out.
I'm going to take the under, but I hope you're right.
They wouldn't have been that bold if we got all 10, I feel like.
You can become a subscriber for less than $4 a month at ultiworld.com/subscribe. And that gets you access to all of the podcast bonus segments from all of our shows. We have a ton of new podcasts. So if you're a longtime Deep Look listener, have you branched out? There's a great new podcast up from Huck and A, our Canadian podcast, and they're talking about Spirit. And they got a panel with players from U.S. and Canada talking about Spirit of the game. It's a great episode. You should check it out. So you can go to OzieWorld.com to find all of our podcasts, Spreaker as well. Okay, so let's first, Keith, before we go to year in review, let's talk a little bit more about the college championships. And one thing that we got at this college championships that is a bit of a rare sight in USAU world, we got a nighttime final. Because the finals were at 3:30 and 6 p.m., and it got dark at like 4:45. So really both games ended in the dark, with the women's final, D1 final, being in, basically complete darkness. So what did you think, Keith? I know the games were not super competitive, so it's always hard to assess when you don't have a really great classic game. But did you like having the games under the lights?
Yeah, it's hard with, especially in college, we get two finals. Even with D3 there, those games were in the daytime. Really, you don't get that many finals under the lights or that many games even during semifinal Saturday. You get one and a half. Usually the third game of the slate, or the second game, depending on how you're structuring it. Which the second to last game starts in the daytime, and you start to get sunset during the game, and when you're doing the 4 semifinals. Now, so we didn't quite get that effect. We have been banging the drum for nighttime finals, and I'm sad to say that this one was a little disappointing in the atmosphere, the on-field product per se, especially when you compare it to the fact that the last semifinal the night before was by far the most exciting, game of the whole back end of the bracket, that Carleton Washington women's semifinal, which had the most energy. Still fell short of matching that, but there were certainly a lot more fans in the stands, it felt like, than what I would expect from a traditional final. So that part I can at least feel good about. I still feel like this is the right angle to take, even if this one size sample is not necessarily the most reflective of an incredibly atmospheric event. We're all chasing the Raleigh semifinals, the Magic.
There's not much you can do about a total blowout game.
Right.
I don't care when you play that game. You could play it in the Super Bowl with 60,000 people, and people are going to be streaming out the exits at halftime. Sorry, that happens in sports. But I don't really think that has anything to do with the quality of the environment that is created by evening time finals, which I actually thought were great. I thought the energy was really good, even in the blowout. Like when Abby Hecko made that crazy catch before she got knocked out of the game, people were hyped about that. I was actually looking back at a clip from the apparently now non-existent broadcasts on ESPN. You can't find them, apparently.
Someone in our Discord, this has been discussed in our Discord, there were some errors with specifically the finals. It was the other videos were working except for the finals. And then they got taken down, I think, and somebody in our Discord asked ESPN customer service about it. They said they were looking into it, so we're just throw our hands up. We don't know.
Hopefully they get replaced. But either way, Abby Hecko makes that catch, and they cut to shots of the fans in the stands, and people were going nuts. I knew it was a great environment. It's simply better than the midday sun beating down on everybody.
And there's something to anticipate. There's a reason to be there, as opposed to, when we talk about the club championship finals, everybody wants to leave after semis. They're like, right. It's time to go.
Right.
If everybody's planning to be there for the nighttime that night anyway, because, who knows, maybe you're going to be in the final, then it's different. So that's a big difference to me.
We'll see what happens in the future. Obviously, the downside, of course, is that it's hard to deal with flights and things. But, I think if everybody knows in advance that this is how it's going to be, it can totally work. I think it's maybe a little trickier for college, but club, this should be a high priority in my mind. Okay. Who are the biggest surprise teams to make or miss the bracket?
Biggest surprises. Maybe they're not surprised to you, Mr. Bandwagon fan. I think you even got called out by either Toter or Lepler for being the first on the hype train in the ultimate media sphere for Georgia. But I mean, I certainly was downplaying their potential. That it's hard not to lead with them given their success. To me, they were the shock of the tournament, but not the only one. But man, they were way better than I thought they were going to be.
Yeah. Oh, no question. I mean, both them and Michigan, who both made the semis of 11 and 12 seeds, were. I said it in the preview that those teams were significantly underseeded, and that ended up being true. I mean, Michigan 15-12 win over Washington, so impressive. But I think for me, I would probably point to Tulane as being the biggest surprise. I mean, in retrospect, I still think that, when you see how well the Southeast performed overall, it makes more sense. But if I had to, put money on it after watching Southeast regionals, I would never have suggested that Tulane could make pre-quarters. But they did, and gave a decent game to Texas in that game. So that on the men's side, that's where I point to. On the women's side, I think, we talked a lot about the strength of the Southwest. So like UC Davis making it, no surprise there. I think Virginia and Chicago, like that being a pre-quarter, that's surprising.
Virginia is definitely the other one that came to my mind as a big surprise. I did not. I was ready to write them off too. I mean, I was really wrong about them in Georgia, and they looked the part. Like this, it didn't feel like they got a gift anywhere along the way. They played a tough slate, and they won their games, and they looked good doing it. So they definitely impressed me. I'm a little more lukewarm. Like Tulane definitely surprised me. They would be on my list. I have them lower in the list than you, because ultimately, they beat Pitt, which turns out to not be that impressive, and then narrowly lose to NC State. But other than that, their weekend wasn't that great. But when you watch them play, they were certainly a step ahead of what we expected. So yes, to me, a surprise. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think I can have them quite the level of the Georgias and Virginias. Pittsburgh, of course, we got to mention them too. Definitely shocked. I was high on Pittsburgh, really on both the men's and the women's sides, and I was disappointed with the outcomes of both teams. But mostly the men who missed the bracket and just looked out of it. I don't really know what to say about watching them play. They just didn't seem like there was any sense of urgency to their play, which is totally not what I think of when I think of Pittsburgh. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I feel like they're usually so dialed in. This is the program. They're so bought in. And they just looked a little disinterested. And I was very surprised.
I mean, aside from Carleton, who, of course, had to withdraw from the tournament due to COVID in the first round, Pittsburgh was the only top seed to even really come close to missing the bracket. Like the other teams in the men's division that did not make the bracket were seeded 13, 14, 17, 18, 19, and 20. And then Pitt at 5. So, I mean, significant underperformance. I mean, even if you think Pitt was overseeded a little bit, just kind of a disaster appearance for them. And, I wonder what it's going to mean for them heading into the spring. The women's side is a similar story. Like, mostly low seeds miss the bracket. Like, and I think that's about what I expected. We talked about coming into the tournament that the bottom, 5 to 6 teams were just not at the caliber of a typical college nationals because of the way they did bids this year. And I think that really is borne out by the results. I think you have to say that probably the biggest surprises are Georgia, who, strangely, they have one win over Ohio. They lose all their other games. Tough pool, very tough pool. But, North Carolina, we heard Ella Youngstown here talking about how good Georgia was, how good Marie Perivier was, and they only managed to win one game. But maybe that's just a relic of the fact that their pool is so tough with UC Davis, Western Washington, and UNC. Vermont's the other surprise team. They got snake bit by point diff, went 2-2 and missed the bracket.
They were chirping on social media about it too, which I think is calling the system unfair as soon as it works against you is kind of weak sauce in my opinion. Don't beat Chicago by just one goal if you're so much better than they are. But whatever, I don't know. Colorado, is definitely the standout, I think, on that front to me. This is an experienced team with a lot of talent, and yes, they have injuries that they were trying to deal with, but they couldn't even make it out of pre-quarters. They lose that game to Virginia handily. They really were not competitive in the games that they lost. I mean, they lost by 4 goals to Washington and 6 goals to Virginia. So the only good win that they walk away with is 12-9 over Texas in the last round. So I'm definitely disappointed with the way that the showing that we saw from Colorado Quandary.
So wait a minute. Didn't they? Who did they play? Oh, they did play Virginia. Oh, in pool play.
In pool play, yeah. They lost to San Diego in pre-quarters.
I was surprised. Yeah. I think the 15-9 loss to Virginia is definitely the shocker there. Otherwise, they lost 2 good teams in Washington and UCSD.
But they, you expect a team of that caliber to compete in those games a little bit more.
Sure. No question. Okay, so what did you think of the combo D3 D1? That's the other big thing that happened this year. We know that this coming season, 2022 season, which by the way, if you were eligible to play in 2020 as a 5th year, you can play in 2022 college nationals as long as you're enrolled and academically eligible. Don't forget that.
Is this going to be like
6th and 7th years at this college nationals coming up?
Is this going to be like the roster snafu issue? Like, are you literally informing people that they're eligible or ineligible?
I think, it's just, remember back, right? Pandemic starts. We're like, are we going to have college nationals? They like delayed it and then they canceled it. And they came out and they said they're extending eligibility for 5th years, thinking that we were going to have a tournament in 2021. Well, then we didn't get the tournament in 2021 until the kind of bonus nationals. So they rolled everything over again. So I think people know this, but it's easy to forget because we had this bonus nationals, which felt like the kind of send-off, but that was really more for alums. This is like, if you're still enrolled, if you're in a graduate program and you started playing Ultimate in college 6 years ago, you're good to go. You can be a 7th year and play in the spring. So I think we're going to see that from some top players. And we will await to see what the rosters end up looking like. Anyway, the reason I bring this up and why I'm talking about this at all, thinking ahead to 2022 Nationals, it's going to be in Milwaukee, and they're going to be split. So D3 will happen in Milwaukee, D1 will happen in Milwaukee, but they will be on back-to-back weekends like we've been doing in the past. But as far as I understand, there is consideration for having a combined Nationals again in the future based on the feedback that teams and players give. Obviously, we are not teams and players, Keith, but what did you think of the combined format having all 72 teams there at once?
I know that we're going to give our opinions, but I really feel like a lot of it's going to come down to USA Ultimate because I don't know that it had a substantially meaningful impact on what the participant situation was like what your experience was like as a participant. The D3 games got kind of spread out in a way that we haven't seen before. So that probably impacted the way that the bracket shook out. And I thought the D3 games in the back end were pretty exciting. And that could have been in part because those teams were a little bit more fresh than they usually would have been on a traditional 2-day schedule. So that is something to consider, is that having the D3 event also gets spread out in a similar fashion what you see in D1 can increase the quality of play of your top teams in your most high profile matchups. So that's worth doing. It's difficult because you also see stuff like the stats. We basically had to take a pass on stats because it's so taxing on your volunteer numbers to have all of these games happening at the same time. So it's hard to imagine an environment.
That's not a reason not to do it. You got to figure out a way to solve that problem. And that should not be a reason to not do it if you think otherwise it's a good idea.
I don't know exactly. This is something that I feel like you have to be with USA Ultimate to understand. Which is harder, getting volunteers for back-to-back weekends in a similar location or getting a lot of volunteers for one weekend. Like, I don't know which is more difficult, which strains your resources more as far as getting the volunteers out who do a lot more than just taking the stats. There's a lot of in between stuff that the volunteers are necessary for. The parking situation got a little frustrating too on the way in, especially if you're running late for your live stream or something like that. But I thought the field side actually worked up and held up pretty well. Although the quality of the fields, which I don't think was necessarily the fault of the size of the tournament, they were deteriorating a bit during the play.
Middle of the winter,
right? And they had just held an event prior to this event and didn't get to reseed. This was usually the time that they would be replenishing the grass, so it's not good. I don't know necessarily like how it impacted the players again, but overall, I also don't know how it affects your site, how easy it is to get a site. Is it easier when you have a bigger event with more money behind it, or is it more difficult because it's more restrictive in the number of fields you need? It's not clear to me, but I can see advantages either way. I think I prefer having them together for my own personal convenience, although it was a little sad to have to miss a semifinal on D1 or miss the D3 final. Like, you had to pick between the two. You couldn't really watch both. So that was a little disappointing, but that's a small price to pay and only impacts me in a specific way.
Well, it was D3 semis, not D3 finals.
D3 semis, yes. Sorry, excuse me.
But there were concurrent semifinals happening in D3 and D1, at least over the first couple of D1 semis. Yeah, so look, I'll just keep it much simpler than the answer you just gave. I thought it was good. I thought that sort of the cost you pay from a fan side is that it's harder to pay attention to D3 when, there's all these D1 games going on. And I saw some folks a little upset from the D3 world that there were not, more streams of D3 games. And it's something to look at in the future. But, on the other hand, a lot of D3 pool play games are just not going to be very compelling to fans in the same way as D1 pool play games. So the thing is, the flip side is that the D1 big games, so the finals, for example, get the big grand stage. They get the showcase field, they have the stands, and you have way more people there to watch these games. I feel like there were vastly more people at the D3 finals than I've ever seen at a D3 championship game. And it's because it's the college championships, right? It's not the set aside earlier weekend, nobody's going to go. It gets its own thing. So the question becomes, do you think about adding more media coverage to try to get more video, for example, of the D3? Or do you give it its own weekend, which makes it obviously easy to maximize that kind of coverage? Or is it worth having the trade-off of, maybe you get a little bit less exposure in the early rounds, but you still get quarterfinals, semifinals, finals? I mean, I don't think it's ever happened before that all of the semifinals and finals for D3 were all streamed or filmed. I think we streamed 2, filmed 2.
Yeah.
No. We streamed them all. Because they were 2 and 2 in 2 separate rounds. So that's a huge advantage. And frankly, if I'm being honest with you, at a split tournament, we're probably not going to be doing 2 streams per round at D3. So you're not going to get that. So, there's just not the budget for the smaller D3 event. So, I mean, there's just trade-offs. I thought it was great, from the fan side, and I thought that the D3 finals really held up well. Clearly the ultimate quality is lower than the D1 finals, but those are good college games, between good teams. And that was fun. So I liked having that big day of finals and everybody being able to kind of sit at one showcase field. Thought that was cool.
And I imagine that the D3 finals got a little bit of, I don't want to say runoff, but they got a little bit of the bonus hype, I think, because they were around D1. If people were hanging out, just watching live streams or in the mode of watching Ultimate, it was just more Ultimate to watch. So I do think that effect, and like you said, in person, there was definitely a more rich crowd for those D3 finals. And I think
the streaming numbers were pretty good. I haven't looked at them, the analytics closely, but there were a couple thousand people watching the D3 finals. That's more than I've ever seen. And I think that's exactly the reason, Keith, because it's college championships and the finals are on. So we're going to watch the D3 and then we're going to watch the D1. When they're split events, no one is in the mindset of, oh, it's time to watch the college finals right now. So there's trade-offs.
Absolutely. But I expect them to see them try it again, to be honest. I don't know for sure. Like I said, there's a bunch of different factors, but I think overall I agree with you that it was a more exciting thing to have them together. And there are things you can do. There are tweaks you can make to better the problems that we ran into.
Yes. I mean, I think there's a bunch of issues that you can address and say, all right, if we do this again, how are we going to fix these problems? By the way, overall, I thought the Norco field site was really good. Just like a big, giant complex with good amenities. They had a restaurant and bar. There were just people out chilling, like sitting in the sunshine, drinking beers all weekend. That's awesome. Like to have that like vibe and kind of be able to look out over one of the showcase fields for streaming. That's a great thing. I don't know if we would ever be back there for college championships again, but I can understand why they use this field site a lot for Ultimate.
Indeed. It reminded me a little bit of Austin with the big structure in the middle, although this one was a little more of a vibe, with food and outdoor patio rather than just kind of being like what felt like an administrative building. But still some of that same kind of centerpiece. It was nice that was where the finals were in Austin, so you could have the structure along with the games themselves. But
we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're talking 2021 year in review. Stay with us. It's Deep Look. Welcome back to Deep Look. Time to take a look at the 2021 year that was and look at some of the big storylines and news headlines from the year. I think we have to start with this, Keith. Raleigh had a heck of a season or a heck of a year, really. It's not even fair to say season because it was multiple seasons. You have teams up and down the various divisions winning. The Flyers win the AUDL. Ring of Fire wins the club championship. Phoenix puts up an incredible game on Fury in the semifinals. Game of the year, I think. Looks like a team that could win a title in a season or two. You have the success, of course, of both UNC programs winning the college championships. That's the first time that's happened in decades. Raleigh Radiance doing great in their PUL, was it East? It was East.
Yes, PUL East Championship.
PUL East Championship. And blowing by the New York Gridlock, maybe consensus favorite coming into the weekend. Just an incredible all-around year for a city that has been on the rise and I think is now clearly arrived.
That's for sure. And if it wasn't for Nashville Shine, who knows what Toro could have done? Didn't they win Richmond Cup? Didn't they take on the Czech?
Oh yes, yes they did.
So they contributed their component. They probably made more money in their one tournament win than all these other organizations probably did altogether. So I think that the pride though is certainly strong. I mean, the Raleigh community has been very united and has done a lot of work, and now they can be rewarded by being rooted against by everyone for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the Richmond Cup, $10,000 prize purse. Remember that? That was basically the tournament that kicked off Club Ultimate for the entire year, and Toro walked home with a $7,500 prize for winning the event. And I don't really know if I think Richmond Cup is going to be the sort of catalyst for a whole new world of big money club tournaments, but it's certainly an interesting start. I think that tournament will probably remain popular and get teams to come out if they continue to offer that kind of money.
I'll be curious what happens in 2022 with potentially a more traditional club season to work with, because it certainly could become a staple event, and you need that consistency to start building something up.
What's the story that stood out to you, Keith?
Well, how about this one? The Continent Tour. And we got a brand new tour to arrive on the scene this year, and they just did their wrap up kind of like show on Instagram. Shanique Crawford explained that they raised $50,000.
Wow,
which is pretty impressive. Put on 3 great events, but I think the overall impact is going to come from what happens in the long tail, but also just raising the visibility and the profile of Black players in the community, and the plight of Black players and what they experience, even if they aren't superstar players, and connecting those people, I think, has a lot of value. We used to talk a while back about how the U24 process, I think, enhanced the relationships between elite players at the youth level. And I think that there's something to that kind of networking effect that you can get by connecting influential young players with one another, because I think it allows them to ideate and to feel like they have people they can turn to help execute those ideas that they have. So there's a lot of potential downstream effects from a tour like this, but it's hard to say it wasn't a big success. Yeah,
awesome to see. Some great highlights came out of it. And I think you're right. I mean, I feel like I've already seen a little bit more sort of togetherness from all of the people who were involved in that. And I think we could see that reverberate for years to come. I don't know if Shani has announced what the plans are for next year, if there's going to come back as a tour. These ultimate tours tend to do 1 to 2 years and then kind of fade out. It's a lot of work. It's harder to raise money and get fans out in subsequent years typically. So we will see about that. But I think clearly the impact very positive, even if it only is a one-time thing. Another thing I would point to, for all the ultimate we didn't have any WIFDIF tournaments. No big international events. We ended up having to skip the World Championships, which is a big bummer because that was going to be a lot of fun. WIFDIF's been hurting a little bit, financially, trying to come through this long COVID hiatus that international ultimate has been on. Obviously, 2022 looking like it could be a very big year. Maybe some question marks about Beach Worlds coming up in April just because of Omicron and things don't, at least as it stands here today on January 6th, it does feel a little shaky, but I do think things are probably likely to improve enough by April that they will be able to hold a tournament. But I think the other big news internationally is that the WIFDIF coming out with this Ultimate Fours, doing the showcase at Club Nationals, and essentially pushing to get fours into the Olympics. Like, that's the goal. If Ultimate's going to get into the Olympics, it's going to be with small rosters. I mean, they're talking about 6-person rosters. And that is it came right at the end of the year, but I do think that's one of the biggest news stories of the year, just because, if it's going to be LA 2028 Ultimate, it's probably going to be fours, and it's probably going to be very small rosters. Good luck picking the U.S. national team.
Well, good luck beating the U.S. national team. Feels like we could send many teams with that kind of numbers. But
I think the fact that it's such a small roster actually is advantageous for other countries hoping to beat the U.S.
I actually agree with that, but I still think they're going to be heavy favorites. So that all that said, it's gets us that much closer to potentially Disc Sevens being the name of our fair sport. But this is not a huge surprise. This is something we have floated on this podcast a couple of different times.
They had the chance to go with Disc Fours, and they went with Ultimate Fours. So I feel like we're not that much closer.
The ship hasn't sailed. It's still in the port. It's left the dock, but it's still in the port. So all in all, this is not a huge surprise, and we've heard some various feedback in our own channels about this. Folks who think that fours just is not a particularly great format, that there's a lack of strategy, but I'll be curious to see how it actually plays out when played by top level players. I thought there was a fair chance of this happening, or it being a beach fours kind of thing and positioning it sort of as a companion activity in the vein of like beach volleyball. But I don't know if that's really in the cards anymore necessarily. It does seem like grass, which I'm a fan of. I much prefer grass, but we'll see what fours actually looks like on the elite level, because we don't get to see that very often.
Are you a purist? Do you feel like if Ultimate has to get in with fours, that it shouldn't pursue the Olympics?
No, I don't feel that way. But I do want to put our best foot forward, and if we feel like fours is a net negative, if maybe fives was better or something like that, there's some discussion of like, does fours reach the level of like technical skill that would be required to make the game like both mentally and physically exciting? You know what I mean? So I don't know if we'll quite reach that, but I do think that fours can be really compelling, and I think it can make the sport more popular. And those things are generally good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge, they had 3-on-3 basketball this year, and I didn't really love it because it saps some of the same things out of the game that I think fours is going to sap out of the game, right? It's a lot more about isolation play. That there's not nearly as much complexity to the strategy because there's just not, you can't cover enough space with 4 defenders to play zone. I mean, you just get picked apart. So, I'm sure almost regardless, if you take the world's best players and you put them into a Frisbee game of some kind, it's probably going to be pretty fun to watch because they're so athletic, they're so talented, they have such great throws. At the end of the day, I think you just have to accept the fact that Ultimate's not getting in with sevens. It's just not. There's just the athlete cap is too strict. If you're interested, please go read some of the articles that I've written about Ultimate's Olympic dreams. And so if you want to get in, you got to just do whatever it takes to try to get that shot. And then maybe you can get in for the long term when you could open up sevens or, other disciplines, disc golf maybe in the future. But, I think you have to admit it's not going to be as fun to watch fours as it would be to watch fives, sixes, or sevens.
I agree with that much. It's quick bet. More likely disc golf or ultimate sevens, disc sevens, whatever you want to call it. Which would be more likely to make it in the Olympics? Like if there was no disc force, ultimate force, I should say.
So like in 2028 or just ever?
Both. Give me both. If it's different.
Look, disc golf's getting really popular in the US and in parts of Europe. It certainly has a bigger fan base than Ultimate, but it's still tiny relative to like other gigantic global sports. I think the ease of including Ultimate, because it uses facilities that already exist and do not require some sort of complicated setup that a disc golf course would, means that Ultimate's more likely. And if disc golf gets in, it will probably be on the coattails of Ultimate.
Okay. Just want to get your temperature on that one.
Yep. What's next, Keith?
Well, we touched a little bit on the AUDL, but they were the first major entity to return to play. And they kind of had the stage all to themselves for a while. They were the only game in town, really, if you wanted to watch live Ultimate, and put on probably one of the best seasons, if not the best season that we've seen in the league's history. And it concluded with a pretty exciting final and a good postseason, but fairly high level of play across the league and a lot of positive successes from kind of off the field stuff. And it feels like this was a big year for the UDL.
Yeah, I don't even think there's a question. This was easily the best caliber of Ultimate, the best, most entertaining season that we've ever seen from the AUDL. And I have to say, for the first time, I think that I can remember, weekends would come around and I'd be like, what AUDL games are on? Like, I want to watch. Like, I've watched games because I work in Ultimate Frisbee, and I commentate, but like often in the past, it didn't necessarily feel like I wanted to tune in because I was excited to see what was going to happen. There were games, of course, there were big games, but this year, every week felt like it was time to watch. And that's a huge win for the AUDL. I think there's still big headwinds for all of Semi-Pro Ultimate, but this felt like certainly the best, most successful season we've seen from the league. And the caliber of athlete is continuing to climb. Are we going to continue to see more cities showing that kind of full buy-in that I think has really helped with the quality of teams like Raleigh and Chicago? And so, with the West Coast expansion this year, the Texas teams moving back to the South, I think they're positioned for another exciting season.
I agree with all of that. And you mentioned buy-in, Charlie. Are you sure you weren't just sitting there waiting for the next game to come on because your picks were so scorching hot in our Bets Perspective article and I will bring this back to a news bit. DraftKings started taking legal sports bets on a real American sports book on the AUDL.
My picks were absolute fire.
I mean, yeah, if you bet money on Charlie's picks, just riding Charlie's picks, you would have been pretty profitable. Although, to be fair, I think all of us were profitable. You were just like way, way above the margin.
Yeah, I think my best bets were something like 15-3 or something.
I have it written down somewhere. I have it in the document.
It was good. It
was good, and I certainly hope that we are getting those again next year because that could be another profitable season.
Inefficient lines.
Yes.
And so we also had semi-pro, not seasons, but events from the PUL and the Western Ultimate League. Western Ultimate League doing the Winter Cup just a few weeks ago out in California. A great kickoff for their organization, I thought. The PUL having 3 separate events around the country, the East, the International, and the Midwest, in Milwaukee and New York and Portland, Maine. And so I thought it was great that that both organizations were able to organize something. It's tough that they weren't able to have a season. Hopefully 2022 they can get back going. I mean, I think it's like almost non-negotiable. You've got to have a season in 2022 or you're going to completely lose momentum and not maybe be able to keep things moving.
Did you have a sense from, Ultimate World obviously partnered with both leagues to help present the games in live streaming. Did you have a sense of how they compared to one another, how the numbers looked? I mean, was there positivity around the league performance? Were people tuning in?
I can't say that I looked closely at the analytics. Most of the streaming was done via other channels and distribution platforms. So I don't know the numbers necessarily, but anecdotally, it felt like people were super excited to tune in. I think the broadcast went really well. I think the games are super exciting and fun across the board, I thought.
I think, yeah. For the Winter Ultimate League, it was their first outing, so I think people were excited to see them. They had kind of an unusual scoring system. I think maybe it was a little bit behind the PUL. There was a little more saturation in the market than when the PUL had come around, and these were teams and players that people weren't as familiar with because they didn't have a season to establish themselves, which the PUL obviously did. So, in that sense, but. The PUL also had these kind of disparate events that probably had mixed performances. I'll be curious to see where both leagues go from here. And we didn't talk about in the WL. One of the first news bits to hit the entire year was the Portland Swifts leaving the league and now have just recently been replaced, I guess, by the Oregon Onyx. So a different ownership group joining in, based out of Portland, I assume. I guess
Oregon Onyx, superior name.
It is, I agree, than the Portland Swifts, although I didn't have a problem with the Portland Swifts.
Not a bad name, but Onyx is a cool name.
I am curious what it has to do with, if there's anything actually has to do with Oregon, but
I don't know. I got to give a shout out to the Western Ultimate League. I think across the board, the league and teams have the best branding of anything in Ultimate, any organization, league, you name it.
That is probably true. They have some sweet gear. I gotta say the WL teams have unique names, but that still feel like appropriate for teams, and also some really interesting designs. There's a certain boldness to their branding that I really enjoy. And both of these separate leagues had some like real exciting events. When you think of the PUL, you think of the Kayla Strick catch for their big Midwest championship. When you think of the WL, you think of Utah showing out in a way nobody had expected. Again, plays on SportsCenter. There were definitely some real highlight moments for both leagues.
How about the club season, Keith? It was kind of an odd one because we had a lot of teams sitting out for much of, if not the entire, regular season. But by the time we got around to Nationals, it really felt like Nationals, highly competitive, some very, very good games down the stretch, and some just truly excellent championship teams.
It was preparation for college for us. What are we going to do when some teams like basically don't play a season at all? Especially in the men's division, really, I think felt the most like a traditional season, and the women's division the least like a traditional year. So it was a little strange when we got to Nationals, but you're right. Once we got down to the nitty gritty at Nationals, it pretty much felt the same that it always did. There were some surprises. There were some teams that we expected. I shouldn't have doubted Pony. That was a mistake. I regret it. I'm sorry. Wasn't the worst pick of the year. Stay tuned for the subscriber bonus, but I guess I should have counted them out. That was my mistake.
Remember how bad Machine played on day one?
I still can't believe it. I honestly still can't believe it.
Yeah, and that tremendous Fury team getting the ring again, but almost getting upset by Phoenix. It was a great tournament, and
the mixed division, you had the shock teams, you had Space Heater just totally bombing out, you had Shame bombing out. Like it was a wild year.
I think the season was kind of weird and like didn't have a lot of oomph, but I think ultimately that was the right decision. Like if you look back at where things stood when the club season was like getting ready to get started, like people were still a little uneasy about going out, and I think the USAU allowing that flexibility made it so that teams could kind of find their own path, which I thought was super helpful for allowing teams to say, oh yeah, we want to travel right away and go to the US Open and do everything. And then you had other teams that said, we're going to sit tight and maybe we'll play in late August, or maybe we'll just wait until the series. It's going to be a little bit jarring, I think, to come back to 2022, where all of a sudden you're going to have all these teams that have these requirements to go to all of these tournaments when they're going to be crossing over potentially with their semi-pro commitments. How is that going to play out? Well, we'll save that for another episode when we look ahead to 2022. But
USAU enabling the Raleigh success story by not requiring teams to compete during the regular season.
It could have been a different story without that. It really could have. You maybe end up with split rosters, both teams a little bit weakened.
The fix is in. That's all I'm saying.
They colluded with Raleigh. That's what it's all it is. And then how about the college, quote unquote season?
The college series season,
overall, what'd you think? We haven't even really talked about like the alums playing and like what you thought of that.
Well, what a wild ride! Do you remember with the ups and downs that we went on with this extended eligibility thing? What are they going to do? Then we get the final decision. Is it going to be okay for Ultimate? What's it going to do to the rookies? Is it going to be a haves and haves not kind of situation? And then we get here, there's the roster snafus, people are messing up the rosters. I mean, we were on a roller coaster as far as rosters go for college. But in the end, the kids played Ultimate, and was it quite up to the level that we usually see at college nationals? No, it was not. But it was still exciting and fun to see people, although it also came with its own costs and risks. Some that you could foresee, some that you might have not predicted. So on that front, that was a real challenge to deal with. It did not feel like a traditional college season. It was like, some teams are doing this thing and some teams aren't. Much like in club, there are teams that are not participating. All that kind of stuff made it feel a little bit weird. Even to the point where we're at nationals. I mean, you have a team forfeit during the tournament. It's unheard of. But we just kind of rolled with the punches until we got through it. So.
Well, and wasn't that a canary in a coal mine? I mean, reporting out this week from Mags Colvette, and a big shout out to all of the Ulti World reporters and contributors who helped get this survey out to teams. But surveying teams about COVID cases, positives that they had during or following the event, and we've already talked about how we had a COVID outbreak amongst the Ulti World staff that was fully vaccinated and negative tested coming into the tournament. And, there were 8 teams that responded to the survey that reported 7+ COVID cases, in the week following the tournament. Of course, it's hard to know exactly where people were getting COVID. I remain highly skeptical that the actual tournament competition, the actual games themselves, had really anything to do with the transmission of COVID. But there were a lot of teams that had at least a positive case coming out of this event. And I think it goes to show you just how infectious Omicron is, and how travel and being together for meals and hotels and cars and everything makes it really easy for this version of COVID to spread. We'll see if this has any ramifications on events, at least early in this year. But I think that was sort of like an uneasy finish to the season in terms of 2021 news.
Unfortunate to end on that note for the college season, but that's the weird thing about another weird thing about this college season is it's rolls right into another one.
Yeah, and we'll have plenty of chance to look ahead to 2022 on an upcoming show. So last question, Keith. Did Ultimate handle this 2021 season and just year? Did Ultimate broadly handle it well?
Oh man, I feel like you're trying to get me in trouble. I feel like this is a question that's going to get somebody's going to be upset on Twitter unless I like just fine line it enough.
Don't fine line it. Give us a hot take.
I will. I think mostly yes. I think that like what you hear in the broader sense of society, like it's difficult for organizations, especially ones that are already working on small margins, to survive without support from play. And it's hard for people to get their full value out of their lives and their relationships without being able to compete. So being able to be together, you could see how much people enjoyed it and valued that at nationals. And I think that while there were certainly risks and costs associated with being there, I also think there were benefits that shouldn't be completely ignored because of the confluence of events that happened after the fact. I do think that there were certainly some stumbles along the way, and I think that has to be not lambasted and not just like accepted openly, but like this was a very challenging environment to operate in. Things were changing constantly, and so overall, as a community, I think that we managed to compete mostly safely and like have salvaged something out of the year. I think in general, Ultimate did do well with this.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, my critique is that things were a little too slow to come back. I think we were broadly a little hesitant on looking at the science and seeing that, outdoors is very safe. And I mean, I've talked about that plenty on the podcast. But I think when you look at like teams' willingness to do things, and when you talk about the club season, clearly we had basically all forms of domestic competition happen in some form. And, could you say, well, there should have been a PUL full season? Maybe, but was that the PUL players even want that? It's not clear. So, credit to the AUDL for getting things started. And by the way, the only major COVID issue that happened, and we didn't even mention in our news segment the positive test that happened out at SFI West that, became a big blow up, and USAU ended up changing their policy around close contacts and, getting removed from the event. There were really not many COVID issues to be seen, which is great. I mean, I think it speaks to the willingness of the community to take that stuff seriously. Organizations did a good job of making sure there were good protocols in place to prevent transmission. Obviously, you have what happened with college nationals, but things changed so fast. 2 weeks before college nationals, I think that was the first time we were even really hearing about Omicron as a thing. And I don't think people realized just how infectious and vaccine evasive it was. So I don't second guess USA Ultimate for holding the event, is what I'm saying. I think that it was all set up. It was not at all clear that you were going to have something like this where you have a bunch of outbreaks happen. And, thankfully I've heard of literally 0 serious cases amongst any of the Ultimate teams or players or family, etc., affected. Hopefully it stays that way.
Right. You would say you worked with the information that they had, and can you look back and say that they might have misjudged the chance that we ran into a scenario that we did? Potentially, yeah, but I also don't think you can just say that the outcome that we arrived at was, at the time that they were making the decision, the most likely or most obvious outcome.
Absolutely not.
So, when you're doing your review of how USAU made their decisions, I think that you got to take into account the probabilities they were weighing back with the information that they had.
So that's 2021 year in review. And thank you so much for being here with us on Deep Look. Make sure you check out our subscriber bonus segment where we talk about our best and our worst takes from 2021. For Keith Raynor, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.